Hi, I'm Dwayne Dunham, director of this film.
And I am Jonathan Roberts, uncredited co-writer of the film. More on that later.
Yep. And anyway, this movie's called Homeward Bound, The Incredible Journey. We made it in 93, 94.
In 90,
Yeah.
93.
Long time ago, but I'm really proud of this movie. How about you?
Um, well, again, I'll get more into it, but when you have a movie that has animal stars, you can only write so much. I mean, what's going to happen on set and what you intend are often two very different things. I think the end result that came out of this was really good, but there was a lot of unexpected things.
Well, I know exactly what you mean. I had no choice. I mean, you had a beautiful script. Everybody loved it. Disney loved it, but just the reality of filmmaking, especially in the 90s with the technology we had back then, you just couldn't do a lot of the stuff that you'd written. And I know you went on to write some great movies and you reused some of the material. Again, we'll get into that as we get there. But let's start with the house and the fabulous dog actors that we got to play these dogs and this cat.
Yeah, yeah. So we have Chance here. And how many different dogs did we use to play Chance?
Well, it was a mixture of, it depends on the scene, but we had, real dogs. I forget how many, maybe like 100 or 200. And in other shots, it's a puppet. In some scenes, it's the actor in a costume. Michael J. Fox and Don Ameche would get into a dog costume, get on set, and bring the role to life. And some shots we have some very groundbreaking CGI. I think we actually won the Oscar this year for the CGI we used in this film. Of that, I'm very proud. But altogether, it's kind of it's a very nice seamless tour de force of the effects and the animal trainers.
Right, and I remember for some of the scenes with Chance, we actually had a horse who we just painted to look like a dog.
Yeah, you really have
scale.
you have to use every tool in the toolbox for a movie like this, where you're really where you're bringing a fantastic tale to life. Tale, pun intended. So anyway, this is Sassy, the voice of Sally Field from Independence Day and Cats Can't Dance and later seasons of Full House.
Yeah. Now, I just want to say that scene that we just had where she's insulting Chance, it's hard with, a kid's movie to have, insults that'll get by the censors. So we had...
Disney was pretty hard about the word fuck.
Yeah, and, we had to cut out a few slurs, the C word. By which I mean crap.
We can say it now because this DVD is unrated, but the original script had it was very 90s Tarantino-esque dialogue, and it's really a shame that they again, I fought for you. I did everything I could. But, the suits, the powers that be, the money men, they wanted it to be a kid's movie. They wanted it to be a safe family rental, and they won in the end. But I think we did the best we could, and we made something pretty great.
Yeah, I mean, they kept saying it's a kid's movie, and I said, are you telling me that there are no adults that own animals?
Yeah.
And they didn't understand.
I think the number of adults who own 3 animals is, even that. I think tons of adults relate to this movie. I get letters to this day from people who were in their 30s and 40s when this came out, and it changed their lives. They're very old now, but that's why they still write letters, I guess.
Right. So now we've got the third dog, Shadow.
Shadow, yeah.
Right. Who, I think it's pretty clear, was supposed to be a big black dog who looked like a shadow. And something went wrong in the casting, and Well, you can see the result.
Well, what happened there was our casting director only spoke Lithuanian. So what we had to do was we had to translate your script into Lithuanian, hand it off to her, and she used that translation to do the casting for the actors and the dogs. And the word shadow must have just been lost in the translation because she did not pick up on that detail, unfortunately.
Right. Also, somewhere along the way, in that translation, they got the impression that Shadow should always have an iguana riding him, and we couldn't break it to her, and before every scene we would just say, "Hey, can you go get us some water?" And then we would take the iguana off of Shadow.
Yeah, that iguana, A, was not alive. It was a dead iguana that we found, and we really just put it on the dog for her edification. And she seemed happy with the proceedings, and she was very involved in the production. And although she only spoke Lithuanian, she was looking after the animals and taking them home, and she kept a lot of them actually. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the other tricky thing was then once the movie was finished, she wanted to see the final product. And we didn't want her to miss out on the iguana, so we just showed her Lawrence of Arabia,
which has an iguana on a dog.
Right.
Yeah.
And she was pleased. She said, "You've made a great film."
Yeah, she
and
said it was one of the
thanked her.
greatest films she's ever seen, actually.
Yeah. So problem solved there.
Yeah, hopefully she never tries to revisit the movie, or might get a nasty Lithuanian phone call from her. Anyway.
No, I think she went blind.
Oh, yeah, well.
Yeah.
Man, Michael J. Fox.
Oh, yeah.
We really lucked out getting him. Really all the actors. Robert Hayes here from the Airplane movies.
Yeah.
This young actor went on to play, I think, one of the Geico cavemen. And I haven't been following his career, but he was very easy to work with for a kid. Most of them are fucking awful, but he was great. Yeah. Robert Hayes was also not fun to work with.
No, we could
I thought someone from the Airplane movies would be fun.
But no, he was traumatized from the Airplane films. Like,
I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Yeah, whenever someone would say the word air or plane, or if there was a plane nearby, he would just start screaming, and he'd just start
belligerent. Yeah, awful stuff. And he'd call the young boy Leslie Nielsen, and he'd accuse him of all sorts of horror. Like he'd say you farted, stuff like that, and the poor kid was just crying, and Robert Hayes had to be we had to take him off set and calm him down a lot, but eventually he kind of got into the role, and we didn't have too many problems towards the very end of production. He was fine. Oh, that burp sound effect, that was not in my original cut. That was a studio edition. I didn't want it. I wanted it to be more of a realistic, gagging noise, but Disney thought a burp would be funnier.
And originally, instead of a cake, he was actually going to be eating the great aunt of the mom. Not
to death, but just kind of mauling her, right?
Yeah, just kind of taking some bits of flesh out of her leg.
Yeah.
Which I thought, my original idea was that would raise the stakes a bit more rather than just a cake.
We actually got partway into the production, into the prosthetics of that effect before we had to change that. And I think I still actually in my garage I still have the mauled leg prop. If you want that, you can have it.
Yeah. Oh, great.
Now all of those balloons are real. We had to blow up them. There's something like 50 balloons. And we had to find them all in pink. And if you've ever, tried to buy balloons in a specific color, you know how difficult that is, because most of the packs come with multiple colors. We actually just stuck a red filter over the camera because it was midday. Didn't want to wait around with these terrible smelling animals.
By which we mean the kids, am I
Hey.
right?
I mean, they all smelled bad by the end of production. The dogs, the people, the adults, the cast, the crew.
Yeah, in fact, all the equipment that we rented to make this had to be bought because everything reeked. Just
Yeah, they wouldn't let us return the rented equipment.
yeah.
The dogs had kind of licked the lenses, and they just they weren't too happy with it.
Yeah. In fact, they almost passed a rule in Hollywood that animals weren't allowed on film anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it was the 90s. We were like very confident in the future of CGI, and that prediction has basically come true. They kind of don't use animals in movies anymore.
Yeah, for slightly different reasons.
Hmm.
Now, one of the things that got lost in translation was this very, very complicated family dynamic that I had come up with.
Yeah.
In which it wasn't just a mom and a dad and kids and whatnot. There was an orphaned father, and then there was a step-niece, and there was actually one character who we allude to being an aunt, but turns out to actually be a sister, and that all got lost.
Yeah, I was looking forward to doing that because you had these great kind of multi-generational flashbacks, kind of like, The Godfather and stuff, and just the role of animals in this family's life, through the ages. It really would have been a much different film than the kind of adventure movie we ended up settling on.
Right, and the interesting thing about those flashbacks was they took place in all different eras, but Chance was always there,
Yes.
which leaves the question, is Chance immortal? And I really wanted to make viewers think that possibly he could be, but all the hints of that really got lost, which is a shame, because I felt like that
you
was...
say that, but I did try to put it into the film as best I could. If you watch closely, Chance never dies at any point in the film, and that's my way of alluding to the immortal Chance, subtext.
Okay, well, yeah, I appreciate you keeping that alive.
Like I said, I really respected your screenplay, and it was with a heavy heart that I had to work with Disney to kind of destroy it.
Right. Now, I guess at this point I have to say, like I said, I'm an uncredited co-writer, and Disney gave me a full paycheck. They paid me fair and square, but at the end of the day, they looked me right in the eye and they said, "You are a disgusting person, and we can't have you associated with our brand, and we will not put your name on this film. But you've done a great job, and if you ever need a reference, feel free to put us down." And true to their word, they have helped me to get a lot of jobs.
Yeah,
but
they actually, I remember, during that whole situation, they own the Writers Guild, and they introduced basically a few new rules just so that they wouldn't be able, so that they could get away with not crediting you. And those rules are still in place today. Most of them have to do with your family heritage and stuff, but yeah, they were able to basically cut you out of the credits.
Right. Now there was two women credited as writing this. Now one is just a fake person. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
The other, she didn't do much. She actually only wrote the description of the cars in the screenplay. Just like what direction they were going in, whether the seatbelts were buckled.
Yeah, Disney brought her on basically because either I never asked you, either it was a deliberate choice or you forgot, but you never mentioned any cars. You never described cars, or how people traveled, or
It was very deliberate. I
Yeah.
originally wanted to eliminate cars because I saw this all taking place within roughly an acre of land.
Yeah, the Incredible Journey is more of metaphorical title in that sense.
Right, and the idea was that there's so much that can happen just like in your own backyard.
Mm-hmm. Now, we couldn't use real kibble because they have rules against feeding the animals.
Mm-hmm.
So what we did was we bought metal pellets and we kind of painted them brown,
Right, right.
and we just had them eat that.
Yeah, and it was interesting how you guys got them to actually eat the pellets. Because what you did was you actually covered magnets in peanut butter and fish, and then they ate those, and then they were just naturally attracted to the pellets. Like, it looks like they're chewing, but actually
It's the
just,
magnetic force,
It's
yeah.
the magnetic force.
Yeah, our effects guy thought of that, and I forget his name. He passed away.
Vincent D'Onofrio.
Yes, he came up with all sorts of little tricks to kind of guide the animals along and get them to go into the water and to chase other animals, stuff that animals that dogs don't enjoy doing naturally, like smelling things and looking at humans. All required strings and pulleys and animatronics, and like this shot with the chicken in the door, for example. We actually had to build a set. It's actually at a 90-degree angle. So when it looks like our dog actor is walking forward, he's actually falling.
Yeah. Now, I have some inside information of the making of this movie, like the actual filming of it, because I would actually sneak on set. Again, Disney did not want me associated with the film, but I had a series of disguises, and I would actually come onto set every now and then. Sometimes I was just disguised as a tree, and sometimes you can see a tree shaking slightly, because I'm terrible at staying still. I mean, right now I'm actually bouncing in place. I can't stay still. I'm like a shark. If I stay still, I'll die.
Yeah, I mean that's your writing secret. But actually, that worked out well because like pretty much everyone on the crew was wearing some sort of disguise. So you didn't stick out or anything. Everybody was dressed up funny.
Right. There was a lot of wigs, a lot of camouflage, a lot of fake mustaches.
And of course, our actors Don Ameche and Sally Field and such were often dressed up as animals. I mean, the costumes were so good, I can't tell which shots are the actors in costumes and which ones are real dogs.
Right. Now, you chose to film this actually in San Francisco, right?
I chose that, but in the end, we had to film it on a soundstage for the most part. Certain outdoor shots are actually outdoors, but you'll notice later in the film, like the sky is kind of painted on sometimes, and it had to do with the animals. We had to keep the temperature about like 120 degrees for their comfort, basically. So
Right.
it made sense to film indoors where we could really crank the heat and keep those animals warm.
Oh, that shoe. Oh, man. You guys had some problems with that shoe, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot that shoe.
Oh, boy.
That shoe was a prop. It cost something like it was a big chunk of the budget. It was like $100,000 to make that shoe.
And that's my fault because I had written in that specific shoe, and I didn't realize they didn't make them anymore. So you had to go to a cobbler and give them the exact specifications and tell them the vintage leather and the laces and all that. But it's so worth it. I mean, you get so much more out of this scene knowing that it's that shoe. I mean, if it had been a sneaker...
Yeah, if it had been like a loafer or like a Reebok or something, yeah.
Right.
It would have ruined the scene, and the scene is pivotal to the rest of the movie. So I'm glad that we got the right shoe.
Yeah, I remember the reviews came out, and I would say 70% of them mentioned the shoe scene, and it was so gratifying. Like, it was one of the
I
proudest
remember,
moments.
at the movies, Roger Ebert just said 2 words, "the shoe," and gave us a thumbs up, and it was great.
Yeah, yeah. Rest in peace.
Yeah, R.I.P. Great guy. So I love that line. I hate being locked in. That's one of your original lines that survived, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, minus all the swear words, of course. But yeah, originally, Chance had this whole backstory where he was actually the first dog sentenced to prison. And so we see him trying to survive as a dog in prison. And it really informed a lot of his character.
Yeah, we had to get rid of most of that.
Right.
But that actually turned out well because you were able to salvage that material and reuse it in your screenplay for the Shawshank Redemption.
Right, yeah.
Which is a pretty good movie, and if you go into that movie knowing that that Tim Robbins used to be a dog in your original vision, it really makes sense.
Yeah, like I tell people when you're watching Shawshank Redemption, take a picture of a dog, glue it to your screen, and the film it all comes together. Like
Yeah,
that's how
really,
it's meant to be seen.
Yeah, it's a classic, well, that's someone else's movie. I'm not going to talk too much about the Shawshank Redemption. We're here to talk about Homeward Bound.
Yep. Now this is the scene that really drives the action, right?
Yeah,
Now,
it's the pivotal moment.
right. Now, of course, they think that they've just been abandoned. They don't understand. And that was something that I struggled with in the screenplay as well. Because I thought, what if one of them understands English and can talk to the people and is just sort of a troublemaker and just sort of tricking the others?
Mm-hmm.
But the whole heel turn thing and having a distinct villain, Disney just wasn't for it. They said, we don't want any conflict in our films. We don't want any villains. We just want everyone to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And they all had tattoos, I remember, on their arms. And when they said the word happy, they all in unison rolled up their sleeves and showed me their happy face tattoos and just started chanting, happy, happy, happy.
Happy. I remember the chant, yeah.
It would go on for a while.
Yeah, Disney was a great place to work. Think little touches like that, the artwork they had hanging up at the studio and the tattoos and the chanting. It was all like, it really, made it a fun company to work for. And in fact, you go to the Disney studios today and you can still find the original, some of the these animals. They stuff them and have them displayed around, with all the other movie memorabilia, at their main offices in, I think, Georgia, I think. I haven't been there in a while, but yeah, if you ever visit the Disney offices in Georgia, just look out for Chance and Shadow and Sassy there. They're greeting you.
Now, when I originally wrote the screenplay, the title was Crispin Glover Directed This. Because I figured if I named it that, there was no way that they could hire anyone else but Crispin Glover.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, no offense to you, I like what you did a lot, but it's apples and oranges. I mean, I would have loved to have seen what Crispin Glover was going to do.
I can't disagree with you there. I mean, he was the superior director, but I mean, well, for those that don't know, what happened was he died.
Yeah.
In pre-production. And I mean, don't get me wrong, the guy playing Crispin Glover now is great. Mm-hmm. He's a fantastic tribute to the original Crispin Glover, but Crispin was interested in the project, and they were in talks and preliminary discussions about Crispin Glover directed this.
Yeah, and
version.
I got to talk to him, and he said, I don't see this as a conventional film. What if we had a series of Jello molds in front of the camera that just sequentially told the story, and then had the sound of rabbits being slaughtered played over it instead of any dialogue? And I just it was brilliant because that told my story. I felt he understood my script more than I ever did myself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm humbled to have created a version of. I like to think that what we ended up making still has a little bit of that Glaverian Jello to it, but I unfortunately he I forget how it was, what exactly it was. It was something. It was like a surfing accident or something. But he basically it died in a volcano on a surfboard.
Right. He died. It was tricky because what happened was he died of burns, but it was while he was surfing.
Okay.
The details are a little messy, because all of the witnesses fled the country, and had their vocal cords removed. So we're not entirely sure what has happened.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Google Crispin Glover, Hillary Clinton, if you want the real story. But anyway, we won't get into that.
Yeah.
So here we go. They're on they're Homeward Bound. They're on the Incredible Journey. I just want to talk about the score a little bit.
Okay.
We got the incredible Gary Busey to score this film.
Yes.
Most people don't know that he's a world-class composer.
Yeah, and he can do things with instruments that like you would never expect. Like this whole score is played on the tuba. And at first
The entire thing.
the
yeah.
entire thing. And
I thought he was kidding, but he showed me the orchestra and
yeah, and
Yeah.
you tell people this is all tuba and they say no, but then they stop and they listen and they go, "Oh my god, it's all tuba."
yes, he's great. I would love it if he got back into composing. He mostly acts these days, but hats off to him. Now, in order to find a log that a dog would fit in, we basically had to build a miniature dog puppet. So that whole scene was shot in miniature because we just couldn't find a tree that we were allowed to chop down, basically. So we had to use a smaller one.
Yeah. There's a law in San Francisco where you're not allowed to film plants, and so
We had a little more leeway because we were Disney, but yeah, for the most
Yeah.
part, yeah, we couldn't use a lot of real foliage, so we had to we had to use store-bought foliage. That's the law. You can't just go out and film nature without permission.
Well, the other thing about that is if the people who made that law are asleep, it no longer counts, and you can get around it. And so, you guys, I know you would send out your sleep scouts.
Yeah,
industry standard. You'd send them
Yeah.
out to watch when the lawmakers fell asleep. And then once they were, you could film stuff. So I'm sure that made like these night scenes very easy.
Oh yeah. All the night scenes we were able to film in the real outdoors and with real plants. Sometimes we'd have to basically shut down production because the lawmakers would wake up from a nightmare or something like that. Our sleep scouts were very on the ball.
Right. Now let's talk about how you got the animals to look in a particular direction at any one time. I understood you used a lot of robotic eyes implanted into blind animals.
Yeah, I mean, we found cats that just had lost their eyes through one thing or another. It happens. Hey, it's Hollywood. But we were able to, put fake eyes in real cats. We were able to put real eyes in fake cats. It was really, just a beautiful blend of practical effects. And let me tell you, your script did not help. Like that thing is constant stage directions of, sassy looks left, sassy looks right, Chance looks at Shadow looks at the ground. It's just, I was pulling my hair out because I was like, how are we going to film all this animal looking? And luckily I was able to get, I get the effects team on it. And yeah, we got a lot of good eye movement out of these little cuddly creatures.
Yeah, well, I tried to help you out because you were telling me, I'm having a problem with this looking issue. And I said, I got you. And what I did was I handed you a script in which everyone is constantly looking east. Mm-hmm. But that didn't seem to make the issue.
No, we had to throw that script out because I spilled coffee on it. So yeah. This fish was awesome. This was a real fish, and it just happened to jump out of the river at the exact right time, and it just flopped right over there, and the dogs ate it, and but we were able to get the fish to sign a release, thankfully, so it stayed in the movie.
Yeah. Great fish. I remember the stories about it. I believe
the Oscars, it was actually in the in memoriam section that year of the Oscars. They had the fish.
Yeah, and actually, if you look at the Hollywood Walk of Fame,
which we often do,
right in between John Wayne and Judy Garland, you'll notice that there is a slight gap. And they actually left that gap in tribute to that fish.
Yes, which unfortunately, the fish was never able to put his little flippers in the cement, but the gap is there, basically in a tribute to the fish.
Right. And I mean, everyone who walks by knows that at this point. I mean, we're not saying much that people don't know already, but, he should be recognized for his work.
Yeah, really. I mean, that fish... is probably the second thing that people ask me about when they find out I made this movie. The first being the dogs, right, and the third being the cat.
And the fourth being, people are just fascinated by the fact that we featured the sky in this movie.
It hadn't been done.
Yeah.
Up until this point. This was the first movie to feature the sky.
Right, because it was just such a technical nightmare up until this point. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember all the stories, people would just attempt to film the sky, and the camera would just burst into flame. That
was a big problem. And also, it was just taboo to show the sky in a film, partially, in response to just how hard it was. It kind of just became a really alien thing for people to see. Nobody wanted it, but... I mean, I can't...
took people right out of the movie.
Yeah. I can't take total credit. About a year before this came out, there was an episode of Murder, She Wrote where Angela Lansbury, goes outside and looks at the sky and the sky helps her solve the murder, I think, something like that. But that kind of opened the door for, some of the techniques we were able to use to get the sky. Now, of course, talking about it now, seems silly. The sky, like modern movies, are practically nothing but sky.
Right.
The latest Marvel movie, the camera is basically pointed straight up the entire time.
Right.
But that's standing on our shoulders pretty much. And if you notice, the sky really isn't there all that often. We had to kind of budget around showing it as little as possible, but we were able to, snag a few technical awards, basically.
Right. Now, of course, you can't put a cat into water because cats are soluble. Mm-hmm. They will dissolve if you put them in water. So what did you guys use? I heard it was...
It's a baby that we put in.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's what
so
it was.
We basically just made a little cat costume. We put it on a baby, and we put this baby stuntman, I think it was a boy, yeah. Very, very, very young stuntman in the water, and he was great, and he did a good job. He acted the role of Sassy very well, and he got rescued by the dog. The dog is real because dogs will hold together in water. And we were able to get the shot.
Right. And again, this was another effect that was achieved with magnets because dogs love watching babies drown. And so we had to have some reason that the dog would be going towards Sassy.
Yeah, so just a huge magnet. That's how we accomplished that. Again, like by this point, the dogs were just full of metal pellets. So like it made the magnet stuff really easy.
Right, right.
I forgot. I haven't watched this since it came out.
I thought this was actually the end. Is there more?
No, there's definitely more.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. Okay, all right. Yeah, no, I was wondering why the credits weren't rolling, but yeah, I guess there is a bit more.
Well, you're remembering an earlier cut where I had the credits roll after this sequence, and then after the credits, the rest of the movie played.
Right, and I remember that early cut, it tested extremely well.
Yes.
Like, people stood up and applauded. And...
people loved it because they thought they got the whole movie, and then there's another hour of the film. People just weren't expecting that kind of bonus content, basically. But, again, it was ahead of its time. It's standard practice in movies now, but at the time it was just it was a little too weird for mainstream audiences.
Yeah. I really wish they would release some of the earlier cuts of this film, especially the cut where it's just Rosie O'Donnell in a chair reading the screenplay. That was an early concept for the film. We brought her in to do a table read as the narrator of the entire film, not just in the traditional narrator sense, but basically describing everything that happened in the film straight from the screenplay. And we just loved what she did so much that we thought, like, well, the movie's done. We got it on tape. Yeah.
And we had a release date, and once again Disney said, like, oh no, she's a controversial figure. Nickelodeon has a contract with her. We don't want it. We don't want Rosie O'Donnell in the film. Take her out. Because she had just been in A League of Our Own, and that movie was a very controversial film, and they basically didn't want that association.
Yeah, which is a shame because it would have been a big budget saver to just release that first version.
Yeah, it's because we didn't pay her.
Right.
Again with the looking, yeah.
Yeah, now this was an interesting scene before you added in the dialogue. It was really just staring and just more staring. And then eventually the sound of a kazoo. Yes.
The kazoo. It's still in there. We just turned it down a little bit. But if you listen to it closely, there is a kazoo.
Yeah. The kazoo sound is sort of like the fourth member of the trio. It's very ever present, whether you really focus on it or not. But it's its own character with its own perspective and everything.
Yeah. Again, our composer Gary Busey brought the kazoo to the set, and he was just humming into it, all the time.
Right, and he would put it inside his tuba sometimes, and he would play it that way. Yeah,
basically just so so he could still claim that it was 100% tuba.
Right.
Now this actor, another actor, I forget his name. Do you know who he is?
Oh, yeah, that's actually Tom Cruise's younger brother.
Yes.
Yeah.
Phil Cruise.
Phil
yes.
Cruise,
Okay. Now
yeah.
I remember. Yeah. He had a lot of great stories about Tom. Really good guy. He really loved the animals. Genuinely, he wasn't acting like most of the actors. He loved in this shot, that's actually Sally Field in a costume. But
right.
He loved working on set. He loved being in a movie, and we were happy to work with one of the Cruises.
Yeah, and he had actually never heard of a cat before, and he called me up knowing that I was the writer, and he said, "What is this cat thing?" And I spent hours describing what it was and what it eats and how it acts, and he was just fascinated. And he had all these questions. He was like, what do they eat? How buoyant are they? How much do they weigh? Can they see in the dark? Do they bounce? You know, things like that.
Probably things you yourself hadn't considered.
Right.
Because I
right.
noticed, yeah, I remember, after you asked you those questions, you turned in another, another draft of the screenplay that basically answered all those questions and
Right.
led to a lot of great scenes where the cats would, bounce and float and stuff.
Right, and I actually wrote out the entire chemical makeup of a cat into the script, mostly for his benefit, because he kept asking how much hydrogen, how much carbon, and I calculated all of that for his benefit, and I feel it really shows.
Oh yeah, that's one thing I kept in the movie was all that information. It's all kind of coded into the film.
Right.
After you're done watching it, you'll know exactly what a cat is made of.
Right.
Now these are human actors. We were able to get them for a day, basically, and they played their characters pretty well. Not as well as the animal actors, but they were okay people. Oh, now this guy, he's also related to someone famous. I think he's he's DB Cooper. That's this guy, yeah.
Yeah.
Famous plane hijacker, never caught, but he agreed to appear in the film. Little cameo.
He said, "Don't tell the cops I'm here." Mm-hmm. And that was it.
That was it. And we weren't allowed to ask about the plane thing, but everybody wanted to know.
Yeah. He told me in private about the plane thing. He wrote it out on a Post-it note, and I framed that Post-it note. And if anyone wants to know the true story, you can come over to my place. I'll show you the Post-it note. I've got it framed, next to my award for biggest bed, which, oh boy, I don't want to get into that story about how I ended up with the biggest bed, and biggest bed in Iowa, of course, not biggest bed in the world. I mean, I don't think I'm that big bed guy, but yeah.
Now, it was a little tricky getting the kids to act angry and sad, but what we did was we just told them, think about the worst day in your life, and just think about that for 2 hours, and then come back to the set. And they did it, and afterwards, they did a great performance, crying. And I asked them like, "Whoa, what was the worst day of your lives? What were you thinking of?" And both the kids said, "It's today. Today was the worst day of our lives." And I was like, "Wow, that's amazing."
Yeah, and that's when you really know that you're doing your job right. I mean, it becomes cyclical. It's the film becomes the inspiration for the film.
Yeah, in fact, it reminded me of a great Alfred Hitchcock quote, which was, "Every day on set should be the worst day of a child's life."
Right. Yeah, the problem with kids on set usually is they're so joyful and they enjoy everything, and you have to try your best to get them to stop smiling and laughing.
Luckily, that is not hard. Kids are very easy to upset. Basically, just we would just tell them, stuff like, the Earth's gonna crash into the sun,
Or your parents died, those sort of things.
Yeah, it's sort of things that you'd want to wait until after production to tell them, but we just told them mid-production, and it lended to the gloomy atmosphere that the film revels in.
Yeah, I remember at one point I had heard that one of the kids were told that ice cream was uninvented And the kid said, "What did that mean?" And then they just said, it hasn't been invented yet. They uninvented it. There's no more ice cream."
I remember a bunch of the crew overheard that, and there were walkouts that day because everybody was just upset about the ice cream thing, and it was total nonsense. You know,
Right.
of course, ice cream hasn't been uninvented. It was just we're just fucking with a kid, you know. But oh, excuse me.
Oh, you're choking on your ice cream there.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, we're big ice cream fans.
Yeah, big
you
ice
know?
cream guys. We had basically, you know, we had to bring out a tub of ice cream for the whole crew the next day to just say, like, look, ice cream's still real.
Now, my favorite thing about that was just before that, they were determined to reinvent ice cream, and they all got together and they tried to figure out the formula for ice cream.
Some of Hollywood's big, you know, greatest minds just working together trying to come up with ice cream, and they weren't able to do it.
No, they didn't even come close. I mean, there was no cream, there was no ice. There was a lot of mustard. I remember every iteration of it had mustard. They were determined that the main ingredient was mustard.
Yeah, well, what they came up with was, well, since it was since they were working for Disney at the time, Disney owns their attempts, you know, the product that they made, and what it ended up being was kind of a caustic substance that the Disney company still sells. You can buy it. It's called Not Ice Cream, and it's very dangerous, and it's got the Disney logo on it, and it's a big seller.
Yeah. If you go to Disneyland and go to the Not Ice Cream stand, you can get a big bowl of it.
Mm-hmm. Now this set with the rocks, again, this whole scene is an indoor set. We had to build those rocks out of basically Lego bricks.
Mm.
I forget the exact reason why, but yeah, we had to use a ton of Lego bricks in the production of this film. I think it was something to do with a union thing.
The crew refused to work on the ground, and the way around that was to cover the ground with unnatural things. So technically, since rocks come from the ground, you know, the crew couldn't work with that. But if you use Legos or other artificial things, then they're okay with that. The other way to work around that was to suspend the crew from the air. I remember coming to set, and there was a lot of cranes, a lot of big helium balloons, and you know you'd see the crew, and all their feet would be hovering just off the ground because there was only so much artificial ground you could create.
That must have happened when I was not on set because I don't remember any suspending of the crew. I took a few breaks from the directing of the film.
You took a year off.
I took a year off.
Yeah.
It was just such a stressful production, and there's no rule in the standard Hollywood contract that you can't just take time off from directing a film.
Right.
A lot of professional directors will take a year or 2 or 3 off of a production, and they'll get a friend or a relative to sub in. So my mother was actually directing part of the film, uncredited, and it was probably her idea to suspend the crew because she's a fantastic woman who is always coming up with great solutions like that, and that's why she's usually my main pick for a substitute whenever I take time off of a film.
Right. All right. So the butterfly there.
Yeah.
That was an interesting effect. See, the butterfly is actually human-sized, and
yeah, it was actually it was a tremendous puppet that we built, Jim Henson Creature Shop.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got it in, we were like, "Why did you make this puppet so big? It's a butterfly." And it turns out, they were still a little bit rudderless after the death of Jim Henson, and most of their creators there had forgotten what butterflies looked like.
Yeah, they had a scale chart of how big things were, And Jim Henson, in his will, specifically asked to be buried with it. And so at the Jim Henson Creature Shop, to this day, they're still not sure how large things are supposed to be. And so it's standard practice when you order something from them, they will just make it in every size.
Yeah, that's basically because of the butterfly situation. They kind of threw their hands up and said like, all right, fine. Next time we'll just make it in, every possible size you could want. So, like for instance, like later on in the film, there's an elephant, and they gave us about 100 different elephants, from basically from the size of a pin of a head or a head of a pin to the size of an entire warehouse. We have all these different elephants. And ironically, they actually did not make a normal elephant-sized one. It was all various sizes, but they didn't have like the perfect elephant. So there was a lawsuit there, and we actually ended up using a real elephant.
Yeah. So this is the big reunion scene. Mm-hmm. And it was hard to get a shot of the three of them together, right?
Yeah. So if you notice, most of the time the animals aren't on screen together, and that's actually for personal reasons. The animals, what they don't tell you about animals is, they're every bit as dramatic as human actors. They have, they all have histories together. They all have beefs, they're constantly insulting each other and offending each other and forgetting to invite each other to their parties. And what happened on our set was, most of the dog actors, again, we had hundreds and hundreds of dog actors. There was just kind of like there was a huge divide among them, and most of them still won't work with each other to this day.
Yeah, it's really a shame. I mean, we had to sort of choose, like when we had press events, like everyone wanted to meet all the animals, but we couldn't have them all together at once. So we had to choose which one was going to come with us. Luckily, there was a lot of animals to choose from, as well as Sally Field in a costume. She was always our go-to.
Oh, yeah. Now, Don Ameche was 105 when we shot this, and he was such a great sport. He got into the dog costume as much as as often as we asked him to, and he wouldn't take it off unless we had to cut it off of him, just because he loved being in there so much. He'd say things like, "I want to die in this dog costume. Let me die in this dog costume." And we'd say like, "No, Don, quit being silly." But he just wouldn't take the costume off, and we'd have to cut it off, and we ruined a lot of good dog costumes just because Mr. Ameche, bless his heart, was just like having so much fun.
Yeah, and I remember when you would take the costume off, he would just say, "My skin, they've taken off my skin. I don't have my skin. Where is my skin?" Mm-hmm. All right, so the police station. Now, we saw a man being hauled in a mohawk.
Yep.
And that guy was really being arrested. It was not legal at this time to have a mohawk.
No,
it was considered very, very dangerous.
Yeah, so what we did was, it was we couldn't afford police costumes, so we actually hired the actual local police for this scene. These are all real cops, and we brought them on set, and there was a production assistant who had a mohawk, and the cops just kind of swarmed in on the guy and dragged him away, and we're like, oh, there goes our coffee for the afternoon.
Right. And because these are real cops, that whole scene is just improvised. I mean, you tell a cop, what our young leading man here is saying, that's just what they're going to say. And that's just good filmmaking, I know a lot of other productions took on that technique of, you just go into a police station and then you just state the crime that's happening in your film, and you just let it go, let the movie magic happen. Unfortunately, it's led to a lot of actors getting arrested because, they'll give the description and it'll be, John Leguizamo or Denzel Washington. But that's the price of authenticity.
Well, unfortunately, it's led to, again, a lot of over-reliance on CGI in modern films. Most of the time you see a cop in a movie now, it's completely computer-generated, just because actors refuse to work with cops. And to be honest, I don't blame them. I didn't enjoy working with those cops, although they put in a good performance. Between arresting, people on our crew, and most of them didn't even own pants. We actually had to tailor cop pants for them. They were just they just showed up to set with no pants on. They were very unprofessional.
Yeah. It's a shame when that happens. So this was originally what I call the giraffe scene. And
yeah, the little girl was supposed to be a giraffe?
That's what it was. And it was supposed to be a giraffe who had wandered away from Africa. And the animals were going to say, we've gone away from home, we're so far. And the giraffe helped to put things in perspective. The giraffe would say, I came here all the way from the savannas of Africa, and I'm trying to get back. And they said, I guess we're not so far from home after all. And then there was a sequence where they actually walked the giraffe all the way back to Africa, and then they walked back here and resumed their journey. And it all happened in about a minute and a half.
Yeah, that's one of the scenes that I personally asked to have taken out. I just thought it was stupid. I didn't think a giraffe would make its way to America. I thought it was unrealistic, and I also just don't like giraffes. So I axed that, and I'm sorry.
Now, I have to admit, part of that was my fault, because at the time, I had greatly confused Africa with Asia, and I also thought that Asia was where Canada is.
Okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
What happened was I received this globe as a gift, and it was very, very fragile, and I knocked it over, and I glued it back together, and it didn't quite, I guess I didn't quite do it right, but I was certain it was correct, even though it no longer actually made a sphere. I was certain that it was correct, and that reassembled globe, which was actually more of a hexagon at that point, it informed a lot of this, the original script for this movie. And luckily, smarter, tamer minds came in and fixed a lot of my geographical errors.
Well, it's very humble of you to admit that. That's why you always buy a second globe.
Right, yeah. That's where that phrase comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah, always buy a second globe.
Now, the barking there is actually real dog language, but it's not for anything like, come over here, humans, or anything like that. That dog was actually saying hello and giving a little shout out to its family back home.
Yeah. Saying, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, hey, sis,
Yep.
And yeah, it took some people out of the movie.
Yeah, anyone who could actually speak the dog language, I think, were probably had their immersion ruined a little bit. It's like in a movie where someone's speaking Russian or something. If you can actually speak Russian, you know that their pronunciation is terrible. But if you don't know it, then it doesn't matter. And luckily for most people watching this movie, a dog bark is just a dog bark. And it just wasn't something I considered. And when I found out, I fired that dog because I hadn't authorized it. But it ended up in the final movie anyway.
Yeah. Now, I hate when you do your best to make a film more modern. And then, the passage of time, it just sort of dates the film. Of course, these days, they microchip pets. Mm-hmm. And so when your pet is lost, it's out there in the wild, all they have to do is they hit a button, and the microchip self-destructs, and your original animal dies, but they then download the data, and they produce a perfect clone, and then they deliver that to your house. And of course, if microchips like that had been around when we made this film, I mean, we wouldn't have a movie. And I think some modern movie viewers say, well, why aren't the animals exploding? Hopefully kids just do their research and understand that this was from a different time, a different era.
Yeah, I mean, the microchips existed back then, but they were much, much bigger. It would have weighed the dogs' necks down to have a microchip the size of a bowling ball in there. So, yeah, the technology, it just wasn't feasible back then. But like the march of time is amazing. That's, I think if we were to remake the film today, we would probably keep it in the original time period just for that reason.
Right.
Because today with cell phones, like animals, if they get lost, they can just call a cab.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you could remake the film, what is the number one thing you would change? I can tell you that if I had to rewrite the script, the number one thing that I would change is I would just eliminate all of the people. Like, the people would just be sort of a metaphor. Like, there would be no humans. It would just be a metaphor that was spoken.
I like that idea. That's really interesting. Would they mention the humans?
Yeah. They would often say the humans, but it wouldn't be literal. It wouldn't be literal humans.
It would be humanity.
Yeah, humanity and the idea of a person.
I like that idea. I think what I would change is I would probably recast it because most of the actors are dead now.
Mm-hmm. Except, a lot of the animals that we're seeing.
Yeah, a lot of the animals still live. They're still working.
Yeah.
In fact, if I were to remake it, I'd want to get as many of them back as I could, just because that's what people want to see. They want to see old animals.
Yeah.
But I'd have to recast the actors. Robert Hayes isn't around anymore, so we'd have to get maybe a Channing Tatum in there or something like that.
Now, I know you were a little bit distracted for a second there because we have the needle scene, and that was rough because you just couldn't get it right. I remember the stories about this where there were real porcupine needles, and there were so many takes because they would take the needle out and then it wouldn't be right, and they had to put it back in and then take it out. And this poor dog got stabbed.
It wasn't a dog. It was Michael J. Fox in there, and he was
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, Michael, what a trooper. He was he was just laying in that costume, having needles poked into his face, and
right, because
he was just cracking jokes, telling us great stories about Back to the Future, and telling us about this Frighteners project he was working on.
Yeah, now because you would think him being in the costume that provided padding on his face, but
no.
That's real blood, right?
It's real blood, and
really
he was
Michael J.
enduring
Fox's blood.
Well, what people don't tell you about Michael J. Fox is he's really big into the hardcore piercings, body modifications, and all this real painful stuff. He was just like super big into it, especially in the 80s. I think on the like the Back to the Future movies, in between takes, he was basically just driving nails into all sorts of parts of his body, basically just to impress people.
Yeah,
it goes way back to Family Ties. I think he was doing stuff with staplers and whatnot.
Now I remember there was a rumor going around Hollywood for a while that Michael J. Fox didn't have any blood. But I guess we're seeing on screen right now.
He actually requested that we use his real blood because he was trying to combat that rumor.
Yeah.
It was just kind of a pernicious rumor that was going around, like, oh, Michael J. Fox doesn't have any blood. But I think National Enquirer kind of stuff. He just he thought it was ridiculous, and he wanted to get a little bit of his blood on screen just to dispel that myth.
Yeah, I remember at the rap party, he would go around and he would hand people these little tiny bags with a few drops of blood, and he would say, "Here, this is my blood. This came out of me. I really have blood."
Those little bags were a huge hit.
Yeah, that was some rap party. I mean, those bags of blood, they were unforgettable. I mean, now when you go to rap parties, everyone hands out bags of their blood.
Yeah, I know.
And the bags
quaint.
the bags just keep getting bigger and bigger too. Like, I remember I was at a rap party just a few weeks ago, and one of the people there, she just had armfuls of bags of blood, and she was just laughing. She was like, "They just keep giving me their blood. I don't know what to do with all this."
What movie was that the rap party for? Because I thought I heard about there was a big blood.
It was Are We There Yet?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was invited, but I couldn't make it. But I did. Yeah, I heard that was a bloody rap party.
Yeah.
Our rap party back then, we were out of money by the end of production. We had to basically have the rap party, just like real quick, like on set. We hired a clown and had a couple tacos, and Michael just saved us with the blood. It was memorable. It gave people something to walk away with, and because otherwise it would have been a disaster of a rap party. And
yeah, and Disney didn't even want you to have a rap party. So what I did was I handed them a draft of the script that just had a bunch of characters that had never appeared before, like cameramen and, a few script writers. Mm-hmm. And I just wrote in, "See, at the end of this movie, there's a rap party for a bunch of people we've never met before, and they talk about these real-life events as if they were a film." And the Disney executive said, "Okay, go ahead and film this scene."
They were very easy to trick.
Right. I mean, that was basically the main way that we'd get away with stuff. Either I would just hand them a script and say, "Look, this is in the script," or I would take a penny and I would throw it and I would say, "Go find that penny and a penny exactly like it, and I will give you a third penny." And that would occupy them for hours.
Oh, wow. Wish I knew that trick. Now, this scene, again, we couldn't film... Well, we could film at night, typically, but this night we could not film at night. So we had to do, a classic night for day, technique, which meant we had to build a huge tent, block out the sun completely. We had to use, light blocking material, very expensive.
Right.
Get a lot of lights in there.
And you have to paint all of the actors with makeup to
make them look a little blue. Yeah.
Make them look darker, make it look like they're in nighttime.
Mm-hmm. And then we just kind of put some black stocking material over the camera to make it look a little dark. And all of this took so much time. By the time we were ready to film, it was actually night.
Yeah.
Now, that crossfade we actually did on set. It was a really complicated lighting effect, but basically we gave the actor some poison that kind of made him fade out of existence. Yeah. And we laced the set with this material that made real life objects just kind of fade to nothing.
Yes.
And we placed those trees behind them. Behind all of this, and we rolled the camera and we timed it out just right, so all of this stuff just faded out of existence, and you were just looking at trees, and it was just a very complicated effect just to get that simple crossfade, but it's really nice. It totally shows the progression of time, and of course we had that actor. We did it on his last day.
Now, obviously, you did not film this sequentially. As you're saying, that was the actor's last day. And I understand you filmed a lot of this movie backwards?
Yeah, well, I mean, just getting animals to walk forwards is really difficult, so we'd often we'd record them walking backwards like they naturally do, and then we'd flip the film over.
Yeah.
Same with this train, actually. The particular train we were filming with, the conductor refused to drive it forward. We later found out he was a serial killer posing as a conductor, and he was just kind of, giving us the runaround, snubbing his nose at us. But at the time, we were just like, well, it must be a railroad thing. Can't run the train forward. Not this time of year. I don't know what the excuse was, but
yeah. Since then, I've learned a lot more about trains. A lot more. I consider trains to be my brothers and sisters at this point. I really feel for them.
Mm-hmm.
I hope in another life that I am in fact a train.
Now, did you write trains into any other films of yours?
I write trains into every film that I've written since. Sometimes it gets cut out, and sometimes the trains are very, very small, and they're actually inserted in between the teeth of some of the actors in the film. So it's
yes, I remember that. Yeah, because you wrote Spotlight. Congratulations, by the way. It's a great movie.
Yeah, another one where they didn't credit me.
Yeah. But I caught the trains in the teeth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mark Ruffalo's got some little trains going through his teeth in that movie, and I thought, I know who wrote this.
Yeah, it's my trademark.
Yeah. Now this scene, very sad scene. Shadows, in the muck, and he fell, and it's very sad. But
Right.
when we test screened it, audiences were just laughing and laughing and laughing. They saw this dog fall and just land and hurt himself, and they just thought it was hilarious.
Right.
And we were just panicking, like, what are we going to do? How do we make this scene have the emotional impact it's supposed to have? Why are people laughing? And what ended up happening was we found out that the entire test screen audience were just like cruel, horrible people. It was just a total coincidence. Everyone who showed up for the screening was just a jerk.
Yeah. Now, in between finding that out, though, I remember I was scrambling to try to figure out how to get people to sort of empathize and feel basic human emotion. And so I was like, well, why don't you just have the words "this is sad" on the screen? And then I realized if you do that for this scene, you have to do that for all the scenes. And so I started writing that for every scene. This is sad, this is good, this is funny.
So what we did was we actually, we had our editor add that in. Mm-hmm. We never that cut never made it to the test audiences because the font was just illegible. It was like wingdings or something. So it really didn't help. Don Ameche won an Oscar for this performance, but it was not televised. It was the first time that they put Best Actor in the technical Oscars. Mm-hmm. And I remember it was a controversial move. The Academy, just for whatever reason, they said, well, this year Best Actor, it's a technical award. We're not going to televise it because people don't care. And as luck would have it, that's the year that our film Don Ameche won, and nobody knew. But he went up on stage in the dog costume. He was 106 at that point, and he got up on stage and he gave his speech in dog language, which he learned for the film.
He got the words a little bit wrong. It was kind of funny because he didn't quite translate it right.
I think he may have thanked God or something like by mistake. He
right.
He was trying to thank
well-known atheist. Of course.
And he died that night, and it was not reported at all, and nobody knew.
Yeah. So this
You just forgot to write dialogue in this scene, right?
Yeah, yeah. I forgot. I just hit the space bar a lot, and I didn't go back and fill it back in.
No, I didn't realize that. You should have made a note or something because I just filmed it as it was. That's one of the few scenes where I was able to fight for it and say, Disney, this is art. This is how it's supposed to be. You're going to let me film it with no dialogue.
Yeah. Now I have a rule when I write a script is I don't edit anything. Any typo I make, anything at all, it stays the way it is. Now I can write an entirely new draft, but I don't edit anything, and that's just my technique, and I find that it works. You know, I try to make everything count.
Yeah, I mean, it's led to some great decisions. I mean, this was originally titled Homeward Found, and it just started off with this scene with the animals coming back.
Right. Well, it's titled Homeward Found after Crispin Glover directed this.
Yeah.
That's when you took on the project, of course.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it was supposed to be Homeward Found, and then you typed in Homeward Bound, and it became a completely different film.
Mm.
Now, in order to get this is a real dog and a real child. In order to get them to play with each other, we had to raise a child and a dog together from birth, and it delayed production for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, you know, the two actors were just very close friends, and we were able to get the shot.
Now, how did you get the cat to cooperate with the girl? Is that a puppet that she's
It's
using?
That's a real cat. What I did was I just told the girl, just grab the cat and squeeze it really hard
Until it passes out.
until it passes out. It's a classic wrestling chokehold that she's doing on that cat.
Okay, so the cat is actually unconscious.
The cat's unconscious, limp
Okay.
as a rag doll, and I just kind of told her, like, well, puppeteer the cat with your other hand a little bit, make it look like it's awake. And she did, and yeah, the shot looked great. Now, I wanted the film to just end here.
Yeah, they just kept making you film more and more. I mean, you had so many perfect endings, and they just kept saying, you know, keep filming it, and I had to keep adding to the scripts.
Mm-hmm. But I loved this ending. I thought it was a reasonably happy. Like 2 out of the 3 animals survived, and I thought, like, well, that's pretty good. You know, not everything needs to be 100% happy ending.
Right, that's 75%. I mean, that's.
And people didn't like it. Suits didn't like it, and I didn't get it. I thought, like, well, you know, why are you so negative? You know, you got most of the animals back.
Right. So then I remember there was a version where he starts running up, and then suddenly an airplane just drops out of the sky and crushes him.
We couldn't film that. That was in your script, but again, you know, the problem was Robert Hayes there, you know, didn't want any airplanes on set.
Yeah. And then I said, well, what about a helicopter? And he said,
helicopters hadn't been invented yet. So
yeah.
Now, Michael J. Fox was really on set narrating the ending here. This was a reshoot, of course.
Right. He was buried underground, and he had a microphone.
Yeah, but the microphone did not work.
Yeah.
So what we had to do was tell him, like, hey, Michael, just yell really loud, but make it sound like you're just talking.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's an amazing performer, and he was able to do it. So he's just underground during this scene, just screaming about friendship and love, and it's a perfect capper for the film. And you know, after the rap party, we were able to dig him up, and you know, during the rap party, of course, you know, and
a few hours into it,
he had his blood bags, of course.
Yeah.
And now in this final shot, that smoke coming out of the chimney there, That's actually real smoke. We actually lit a fire in the fireplace of this house, and we just let it burn for a couple hours, and we got a really nice shot of real smoke coming out of the fireplace.
Yeah. Now, originally,
And the fire was
Oh, go
was real. We didn't film it, but there was a real fire going on in the fireplace, and a couple of the crew members were just hanging out in the house, getting warm by the fire because it was it was like 38 degrees outside or something like that. And eventually, someone pointed out like you can't just let the fire go. You have to put the fire out. So we all kind of like put our heads together and said, well, like why don't we just get a bucket of water and put the fire out? So we did that, and that's how we got the fire out. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna say, originally you were looking at the chimney, I remember, and saying, how do we get smoke to come out of that? What's it attached to? And so you were trying to figure out exactly what it was attached to. So I remember the crew built a fire in the toilet, and they lit that, and that didn't seem to cause smoke. And then they built a fire in the car, and they lit that, and that didn't attach. And finally, someone looked at the fireplace and said, I think this has something to do with the chimney.
Yep, that was it.
That was the one, yeah.
Now, that message, if you notice from the American Humane Society, claiming that, like we were responsible, we didn't hurt any animals, apparently they'll let you put that message on your film no matter what. It's a $50 license for that message. And once I found out how cheap it was, I have bought the rights to use that little message for every film I've made, even if it doesn't have animals in it. Just because it's nice, it gives the audience, a nice feeling to read that.
Yeah, because the audience has no idea when they're being lied to.
No, that's the entire art of film, and I think that kind of cuts to the heart of this particular film, which is, film is a lie, and the love that a family has for its pet is sort of the biggest lie you can tell to an animal.
Right, which is a reoccurring theme of this film as well.
Yeah, and most films of the 90s and, the era that we made this film in, it was a very, it was kind of a post-Reagan feeling towards animals that, we tell them that we like them, but we don't.
Yeah, I mean, Air Force One, of course, is the biggest example of that,
Yes, like the scenes where with the first dog in that film are just like duplicitous and sad.
Right. It's just a lot of empty gestures.
Mm-hmm. Now these
color timer. Oh god.
Oh yeah, Dale Grand.
Oh boy, that guy.
Yeah,
man, he had some stories. I mean, he had timed colors on so many films, even films that had no color.
Yeah, he was an old school guy. He was a color timer in the silent era, and I remember he had some great stories to tell about getting the tone on Fatty Arbuckle and W.C. Fields just right, and dealing with the old studio system. And
yeah, and his father had actually done colors for vaudeville.
Yes,
time the colors for
vaudeville and some old stage productions and stuff, and just a really good, really great old Hollywood family. Now, if you'll notice, this is film number 32183. From the Motion Picture, Association of America, and I actually requested that number specifically because I thought it was a lottery, and those are my lucky numbers. So I was trying to play them and hit it big, and then I found out it's just a rating system.
Yeah,
and they rated it R for some reason.
And there's of course that classic conspiracy theory, because when you add all those numbers up, it's 666.
That is true, actually.